Welcome to Her Story, the history of Southeast Asia told from her perspective. We'll discover historical figures, matriarchal societies, and contemporary female icons, and maybe learn about ourselves along the way. I'm your host, Agus Ramirez. In this episode, we will be talking about the Katipuneras, women from all backgrounds who fought in the Philippine Revolution against Spanish colonizers.
Sa dalampasigan ng dagat Maynila, luneta ang tawag ng mga Kastila, ay doon din na rin ang kaawa-awang pobreng Pilipino, martir nitong lupa.
The Philippine Revolution, which began in 1896, was one of the most important turning points in the nation's history. Filipinos united in organized resistance to end over 3 centuries of Spanish colonial rule. The movement was spearheaded by the kataas-tahasang kagalang-galangang Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, or KKK. I know that means something different in some other countries, but to be clear, I'm referring to our KKK here. It was a secret revolutionary society founded by Andres Bonifacio. Through it, Bonifacio and other leaders worked tirelessly to inspire Filipinos from all walks of life to join the fight for independence. The revolution was fueled by widespread social injustices, oppression, and the desire for self-determination. The direct English translation of KKK, according to most modern sources, is Supreme and Venerable Association of the Children of the Nation. It definitely hits different in Filipino. But here's the thing, right? When you look at older texts, for example, Reynaldo Clemeña Ileto's iconic Pasyon and Revolution, published in 1979, the translation was different. It was, highest and most honorable society of the sons of the nation. This is actually the translation I remember from going to school in the 90s. The word anak is gender neutral. Filipino is a gender neutral language, and yet Ileto translated anak as sons. But the daughters of the nation were always part of the revolution. Here's an account of the frenzy in September 1896 by General Santiago Alvarez y Verata, the hero of the Battle of Dalahican. And with hope in the grace of God, the children, elders, women and men had no fear of death. No news of the enemy's advance was ever cause for fear. The cannon bursts were no longer feared, and even came to be regarded as fireworks in the celebration. The women's stores were open all day and night, singing, dancing, feasting beneath the trees. Gambling and cockfighting everywhere served to make them forget the impending sacrifice of their lives and blood. But at the first sign of fighting, all the men and women would straighten up and grab their weapons of war. So this is where we come in. I don't think I have to explain very much to you about how mainstream accounts of the revolution barely mention women. It's episode 28. I know you know this by now. According to Christine Doran in Behind the Lines, Women in the History and Literature of the Philippine Revolution, quote, women's contributions have been neglected in major historical studies. Doran, one of our main sources for this episode, says that these women were often boxed into domestic roles. She writes, their contributions were minimized, restricted, and domesticated to align with prevailing gender norms. This means that their nurturing side, their passive observer side, their supporting role side was more obvious in historical accounts and literature. As usual, we're here to find out what they didn't tell us in school. The idea for this episode came up during a visit to Pinaglabanan Shrine. This complex is the site of one of the Philippine Revolution's first significant battles. On August 30, 1896, Andres Bonifacio led around 800 Katipuneros in an attempt to capture El Polvorin, a gunpowder depot, and El Deposito, a water reservoir, both critical Spanish installations. Despite being armed with bolos, spears, and limited firearms, the Katipuneros faced off against Spanish forces. Although the Filipinos fought fiercely, the better armed Spanish soldiers eventually overpowered them. Hundreds of Katipuneros died or were captured, and the battle ended in a tactical defeat. But the Battle of Pinaglabanan was the beginning of the revolution. In this complex is a museum dedicated to the KKK, and inside is a section about, you guessed it, the women of the Katipunan. This is where I originally found the list and information about them. Remember this part? We'll go back to this later. So here, we learn about the women's chapter of the Katipunan with its own leadership structure. At the very top was Josefa Alonso Mercado Rizal, also known as Sumibat. She was the ninth of the 11 children of Teodora Alonso Rialonda and Francisco Engracio Rizal Mercado. Now, Josefa, along with her sisters, joined the Katipunan to help fight for independence. She was in fact the president of Katutubong Kababaihan ng Katipunan, native women of the Katipunan. She was also a member of the women's branch of the Masonic Lodge, Walana. Walana as in that which was lost. I love Tagalog. Walana was founded in February 1892. Because they were perceived as anti-government, anti-friar, and therefore anti-Spanish, they always met in secret. The women's branch, Semilla Lohia de Adopción, or Lodge of Adoption, was founded by Rosario Charing Villaruel. Born to a prominent Manila family, she founded this lodge in 1893 at just 18 years old. According to Paz Policarpio, she was known for her beauty, civic courage, and generosity. She used to sponsor Masonic banquets. Her Masonic name was Minerva, after the Roman goddess of wisdom and strategy. Along with Josefa Rizal and Rosario Villanueva, other members of the Lodge of Adoption were Trinidad Rizal, also known as Sumibol, Angelica Lopez y Rizal, Delfina Herbosa y Rizal, Purificacion Leyva, Valeriana Legazpi, Romalda Lanuza, and Sixta Fajardo. They created the Lodge of Adoption to provide women a space within the Masonic tradition. Through this, they became a part of a significant intellectual and political force during the fight against Spanish colonial rule. They operated in secret, raised funds, and spread the message of the revolution. This did not come without consequences. They faced severe repression from Spanish authorities. Arrests, torture, and public humiliation were common. Charing Villaruel, in fact, was among those arrested and tortured for her revolutionary ideas. There's a lot of overlap between the members of the lodge and the women of the Katipunan, so we'll focus on the women's chapter of the Katipunan again now. We're going to go down the list of officers first. So again, the president was Josefa Rizal. The vice president was Gregoria Oriang de Jesus y Alvarez. She was known as La Cambini or Muse. Gregoria joined the Katipunan in 1893 and quickly became involved in protecting the organization's secrets. Many times, she had to carry documents under dangerous conditions, even hiding them in her clothes while moving from place to place. She once said, "If it is for the country, I am willing to face any danger." Gregorio de Jesus's best friend, Marina Dizon, was the secretary. Another one of Oriang's friends was Espiridiona Nonay Bonifacio, who worked in ferrying information and ammunition and other general types of espionage. Every organization needs somebody to take care of the finances. That somebody was Angelica Lopez y Rizal. She was born in 1877 to Narcisa Rizal, sister of Josefa. Besides what we can sort of deduce about her, that she had a talent for math and bureaucracy, there's really not much else. We do know that she was part of the group that went to Dapitan in 1896 to try and convince Jose Rizal to join the revolution. Of course, many women of the revolution are highlighted as flag makers, as they were skilled in the art of sewing. Benita Rodriguez, one of the pioneering women of the Katipunan, for example, helped Oriang de Jesus with the Katipunan flag. Then there was Marcela and Lorenza Agoncillo, mother and daughter, and Delfina Herbosa de Natividad, who made the Philippine flag unfurled in 1898 while they were in exile in Hong Kong. Another well-documented figure from this time is Trinidad Tecson. She is known as the mother of Biak na Bato. This place name refers to a Katipunan stronghold in what is now Bulacan. She was their mother because she served as the nurse for wounded soldiers. That is an extremely important role that many women played at the time. In fact, Hilaria Aguinaldo organized Hijas de la Revolución, Daughters of the Revolution, which eventually became Asociación de Damas de la Cruz Roja, Association of the Women of the Red Cross. Among its officials were Estefania del Rosario, Victoria Buencamino, Lucia Bautista, Juana Chong, and Clara Jacinto. The Cruz Roja's official roles were to collect, organize, and distribute food, medicines, money, and other things, such as mats, pillows, and blankets, among the affected Filipino soldiers. So far, what I've been giving you is a lot of the information I saw in the museum. What is a little less known about these women, in fact, about many of the women we already talked about, is that they were soldiers themselves. Recorded in John R. M. Taylor's The Philippine Insurrection Against the United States was Hilaria Aguinaldo's speech to Filipino soldiers in Tarlac on October 5, 1899. For the non-Filipinos, on December 10, 1898, Spain ceded the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico to the United States. That's the context here. This was a continuation of the anti-colonial struggle. These are Hilaria Aguinaldo's own words. Were it not a shocking thing for us to wear trousers and to carry rifles, that we would aid you in the struggle and die by your side, for what would our lives amount to if we should still have to live in slavery? As though we had seen it, the Americans will endeavor to extinguish the Filipino race for the absurd reason to prevent any future struggle between natives and Americans so that they may reign all over the country. The so-called history of civilization affords us instances of this statement, and if I'm not mistaken, in America itself, the same thing happened. As an indication of what I have just stated, bad treatment, which, in spite of their policy of attraction, is what they are according to our brothers in Manila and in towns captured by them. Under such circumstances, should we surrender? Never. Remember Trinidad Texon, mother of Biak na Bato, nurse of the Katipunan? She was actually Captain Trinidad Texon, who fought in 12 major battles under 5 different Filipino generals. She participated in the attack on Spanish fortifications in San Miguel, her hometown. The reason she became a nurse was because her leg was severely injured in battle and she couldn't fight at the time. At the time, because by the Philippine-American War, she was back on her feet and out fighting with the guerrillas. And she wasn't the only one. According to William Henry Scott, American accounts of the Battle of Batac describe Filipino forces moving against the Americans with an advance guard of women who became the first casualties of American shooting. Remember Oriang de Jesus, Vice President, caretaker of the Katipunan's documents, also known as Muse? Well, she was known by another name, Manuela Gonzaga, and she was a combatant in Balara, now Quezon City. In her own words, I had no fear of facing danger, not even death itself. I was considered a soldier, and to be a true one, I learned how to ride, to shoot a rifle, and to manipulate other weapons, which I actually used on many occasions." Unquote. I would absolutely not be surprised if all the women active in the Katipunan, despite what the mainstream narrative seems to want us to believe, were soldiers too. It's a war. Wouldn't you want to arm yourself and fight in all ways? Now, I'm not saying one role is more important than the other. I'm not saying being a soldier is any more or less important than all the other things women were doing. You know how important strategy and bureaucracy and espionage and medical work is in warfare. I'm saying, why don't we talk about all the roles women played, giving them equal importance, highlighting them together, portraying them in the media that talks about the revolution as being present in schools, safe houses, hospitals, as well as jungles and battlefields, because they were there. That just seems to paint a far more fair picture of our foremothers, doesn't it? In short, my point, it seems to be generally more acceptable to talk about how they transported secret documents or took care of the sick. Many writers, in fact, say the women supported the revolution. They didn't support the revolution, though. They believed in it, they fought in it, they killed for it, and they died for it. And at a time when women weren't really expected to. That is a revolution in itself. Teresa Magbanua was a teacher who lived on a farm. When the war began, despite her family's protests, she learned to ride and shoot. She earned her place in the battlefield and eventually led a troop of soldiers in the Battle of Yating. At Sapong, near Sara in Iloilo, she achieved victory over the Spanish. When the revolutionary forces took over Panay, she led her troops in the celebration, riding a white horse. Like Texon, she joined the guerrillas when the Americans arrived. She never surrendered. Teacher, farmer, general. Patrocinio Tia Patron Gamboa was a rich girl, tutored privately, and enjoyed Spanish-language classics and newspapers. She is best known as the woman who made the Philippine flag for Iloilo, her hometown, patterned after Agoncillo's in Hong Kong. But Tia Patron was also one of the organizers of the committees which later formed the revolutionary government of the Visayas. At the time, she was a spy who worked with various Filipino commanders to carry information. And that flag she made? She smuggled it from Haro to Santa Barbara under the noses of Spanish guards through several enemy checkpoints. That's why that flag was there when the Visayas government was inaugurated on November 17, 1898. Bookworm, community organizer, seamstress, spy. Other women documented in the Revolutionary Intelligence Service were Macaria de la Cruz, Pilar Jueves, and Esperanza Solteras. Rosa Sevilla de Alvero and Florentina Arellano wrote for La Independencia and La República, newspapers that promoted the revolutionary cause. They were both Assumptionistas. There's a staff photo of La Independencia with them sitting side by side in their barot saya, the only two women in the middle of a group of 12. But Rosa Sevilla de Alvaro wasn't just a writer. After the death of her brother in 1899, family accounts say Rosa then cropped her hair and put on a man's uniform in order to fight. She later retreated with her family to the mountains, where the resistance also continued. In a speech in 1930, she said, "Personally, I saw with my own eyes courageous women working side by side with their husbands on battlefields where about the middle of February of 1899, we served as members of the first Filipino Red Cross organized by Hilaria Aguinaldo." In 1900, she built the first lay school for women. In 1928, she enrolled in the University of Santo Tomas, earning her bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, later becoming the first female dean of that university. Then she fought for women's right to vote, assisted Dr. Fe del Mundo during the Second World War, and headed a home for sick soldiers. She received the Presidential Medal of Merit in 1948. Writer, soldier, nurse, social worker, academic, suffragette. We are indebted to Dr. Maria Bernadette Labrera for her comprehensive work on this topic. The book is called Identity and Independence, Filipino Women in Times of War and Peace, and she did the section on the Spanish period. There are several women I wasn't able to discuss here because I did prioritize biographies that nobody else usually talks about. Gabriela Silang, Marcela Agoncillo, Melchor Aquino, and General Acueda Cahabagan, for example. There are other media that discuss them at length. Of course, we can revisit them in shorter episodes in the future. I do want to talk about the women of Malolos as well. I would also like to note that for such prominence, there isn't actually a lot known about either Melchor Aquino or General Agueda Cahabagan. That's a topic for another day. Now, the final point. I'm going to go back to that exhibit I told you about at the beginning, the one I saw that inspired this whole thing. I'm not sure if you noticed what I tried to do throughout the episode, but I didn't talk about the obvious point that always comes up, the famous male relatives of these women. This is because at the exhibit I saw about the women of the Katipunan, the very first bullet point about almost all of them was their more famous male relatives. She was so-and-so's wife, sister, niece, cousin, mother. I understand why textbooks and documentaries and Wikipedia still do this. I understand, but I also reject it. These connections are important, there's no denying that. But so many women's biographies are 80% about their families. If we could give them just one piece of media where it's just about them, why not? And so I guess it's up to you and up to me to intentionally center women in women's stories. I believe we need to make these women known in their own right, not as wives, sisters, nieces, cousins, mothers, but as revolutionaries whose own names are as recognizable as the men they fought alongside with. Thank you for listening to episode 28, Katipuneras, Women of the Philippine Revolution. And fun, exciting news, we are nearing the end of season 2, so another episode is coming out this month, and the last episode will be out in January. That means we will be moving on to season 3 by January 2025, so that's in time for the 5th anniversary of the podcast. In the next episode, we're talking about the often overlooked history of female immigrants in British Malaya, spanning from the late 19th to the mid-20th century. Thank you to our patrons, Shireen, Jurinion, Xiaomei Baimilish, Jennifer, Christina, Raymond, Matt, Ashley, Chanda, Yati, and our newest member, Christopher. And thank you to everyone who subscribed to the Spotify and YouTube channels recently. You can head over to Patreon right now to listen to 9 bonus episodes and get access to full scripts and reference materials, and you can also send me a message if you have any comments or questions. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Threads, and Instagram at HERstory CPod. That's HERstory SEA Pod. This podcast was hosted and edited by Agus Ramirez.